Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and by a slight margin in popular demand, my next review you guys voted on me doing is Godzilla Minus One, the 37th film in the Godzilla franchise and the 33rd film from Toho Studios, written and directed by Takashi Yamazaki, starring Ryunosuke Kamiki, Minami Hamabe, Yuki Yamada, Munetaka Okoye, Hidetaka Yoshioka, Sakura Ando, and Kuranosuke Sasaki. And I'll give you my background with the Godzilla films. I have only seen the original Godzilla from 1954 that came out 70 years ago, and the latest, Godzilla vs. Kong, which was a mind-numbingly dumb movie made by an American studio, and one where they clearly didn't care about any of the characters. They just wanted to see King Kong and Godzilla wreck shit. Alright, so my understanding of the franchise is fairly limited as opposed to some other people that I know. But what I will say is I do love that 1954 original Toho film, which really started it all and has a lot to say about post-war Japan and the atomic fallout that the U.S. kind of instilled upon them after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I love that film because of its social commentary, the fact that it actually is about something and is a very somber drama more than anything. As much as you get scenes of Godzilla wrecking the city, it is much more about that post-war trauma, and I think that's why it makes that film so effective, and the conversations they have surrounding science and what its implications of using a specific weapon could be. And I think, yet again, it's not like my favorite Japanese film of all time, but it's certainly up there. It's one I absolutely love. Not what I would call a perfect film by any means, as fantastic as it is, but still a benchmark in, Japanese filmmaking. And look, so with this one, I heard amazing things beforehand, and keep in mind I only heard about this movie for the first time like a few weeks ago. It was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was excited because I saw the reviews. It looked really good. People were saying it's very good, very promising, and I was like, well, sure, why not? I appreciate the original Godzilla. I appreciate a filmmaker coming in and kind of like taking reign of a franchise, trying to tell a more character-oriented story. And I didn't know much about this film going in, outside of the fact that it was a new Godzilla film, but a day or so before, I found out a little bit of the plot, and that it does take place in post-World War II Japan, which is obviously where this franchise has shown to thrive. And part of me feels like that's kind of in commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the franchise, considering that's where its roots were. Because this tells the story of Koichi Shikishima, who was a kamikaze pilot in World War II, who didn't fulfill his duty and kind of chickened out of cowardice and also his own personal feelings. And after a very chance encounter with Godzilla, he is left with a lot of survivor's guilt and PTSD surrounding the events of his actions. And yet again, this is just a template to set this story off, where Godzilla eventually comes back and starts terrorizing Japan. And look, usually when it comes to movies, it takes me a while to get into the narrative before I can say that I truly love it. But I will say that within 15 minutes of this movie, I loved it. And I said to myself, if this keeps going at the rate it's going at, this could easily be one of the best movies of the year. Now, with that being said, the fact that by the end of this film, I was literally gobsmacked and just sobbing in the theater for a good minute. should tell you a lot about how I feel about this film. This film is a masterpiece. This literally is one of the greatest action movies ever made. And I know this might sound a little sacrilegious considering I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt, but I like this more than the original 1977 Star Wars. And that is not something I say lightly at all. I did not expect to love this movie as much as I did. This is way beyond the original Godzilla film. As far as I'm concerned, this is like above some absolute timeless classics. I was just blown away by the story. And I will say to an even further extent, look, I do have to rewatch Seven Samurai again, because I feel like if I watch that a second time, I will love it even more. But this might be my favorite film from Japanese cinema, like, ever. So, yeah, this is easily the best movie of the decade. I think it goes without saying. This film is so riveting from start to finish. And the thing that is so amazing about it is the political context in which the story is told, but also the characters. Why is it so hard to make these movies about real human characters as opposed to just watching Godzilla destroy shit? That's not what these movies should be about. It really should be centered in very deep human emotion. And the story that they tell here is just unbelievable. I really think Shikishima is the best character in any film I have seen this year. The depth in which Rinosuke Kamiki portray his character is unfathomably relatable, heartbreaking, everything about this performance. This is one of the greatest character arcs of all time, I would say. Sure, maybe we have seen characters similar to this, but I don't think I've ever seen a story quite like this. And of course, the found family that he eventually discovers, you know, this woman who is played by Minami Himambe, and the fact that she has this little girl that she's raising, which is not even hers. And they kind of create this unit together and try to rebuild their lives after the fallout of the trauma from World War II. It is just an unbelievably gripping and touching story. And I think the fact that you get rooted into these characters right from the beginning is what makes the drama and the ensuing disaster that Godzilla wreaks havoc upon Japan and Ginza in this film is just so heartbreaking. Like, Godzilla in this movie is so horrifying. Like, from what I've seen, I've never seen a more brutal, apathetic, and relentless Godzilla ever. It's like one of those things where he's so tough to take down. And the visual effects, I mean, this movie was made on a budget of $15 million. I mean, between this and the creator, Hollywood should really be taking notes of how to make an action blockbuster. And I don't think it's like the most visually dazzling film of all time, but still, it isn't distracting by any means while watching it. Some people say Godzilla's arms don't move. I don't get why that's even a criticism. I mean, come on, you're just looking for stuff to kind of nitpick now. And I think that how they portray Godzilla in this, yet again, every time it appears on screen, you're just absolutely beside yourself. And the atomic breath in this movie, holy shit. Like, what happens when Godzilla opens its mouth and enacts that atomic blast? Like, literally, it turns into a nuke. And I think that's even more powerful and adds to the amount of devastation that's already on display, that already this country was dealing with at this time. And I think it makes Godzilla that much more threatening and that much harder to kind of go up against. And yet again, this film, not only are all the side characters really well portrayed, I mean, you don't get as much into their character backgrounds, but of course, like the shipmates that he has when he goes and takes the job after, you know, the war. And they all have great personalities. They all have a purpose in the story. They all drive the story forward. Sakura Ando, who was great in Monster, which is, I suppose, coming out around the same time as this. Yet again, she plays like the neighbor, and she really plays such a beautiful character, because you get so many moments in this movie. For instance, there's a scene where a character is being so completely vitriolic towards another, and then they have this little exchange, and then by the end of that conversation, the character does something so selfless and so humanistic, and it completely flips how you're feeling about this character, and yet again, it gives so much depth to all these people in this narrative, and also the community that rallies together to take this monster down. It feels like a very communal act of patriotism that isn't out of obligation to one's own government. I mean, the Japanese government can't even help in this because of the U.S. and Soviet relations. And so they're kind of like saying, let's just, you know, be prepared and let's take a step back. We can't tell the public about this, or it's going to cause massive havoc and panic. And I think you see the ideology that goes into a lot of the people helping this, and how a lot of them are still, you know, bitter towards their own government because of their participation in World War II, and almost in an unwilling capacity, which obviously I think kind of incapacitates our main character here. But yet again, it's like seeing his trauma and kind of how he works through it in this film, and the steps that he eventually takes towards the end of this narrative. It is just unbelievable, and I keep using that word, I'm sorry, but literally I was absolutely rocked by this film. I did not expect to be so emotionally invested in it. And that's why I bring up Star Wars, because as much as I do love that film, as much as, you know, it's so iconic, the John Williams score is like one of the best of all time, it's just one of those things where it doesn't grip me like something like this movie does. And I think this film hits on so many different elements, and it is one of the few films that's able to have its cake and eat it too. And I mean that in the sense that the film kind of posits like different ways that the narrative can go, and if the story had ended in either of those fashions, it would have been satisfying. But I love the fact that this film does not write itself into any corners, and by the end you're so emotionally gripped and moved and touched, and it just touched something so deep down inside me that a film really hasn't done in such a long time. This is what I think of when you know, I think of movies like The Green Mile, you know, something very reminiscent of that, something that really just strikes you deep at your emotional core, and so many moving films that I just think have stood the test of time as some of the greatest stories ever told. And I do think that Godzilla Minus One is one of the greatest stories ever told on film. You guys have to see this one. Like, if there's any movie you need to watch this year, it is this one. I think it goes without saying what my rating for Godzilla Minus One is going to be, but I am going to give it a 10 out of 10. This is quite honestly a perfect movie. I have no criticisms with it whatsoever, though I will say you could nitpick maybe a couple of like moments at the very end. But yet again, it's one of those things where the full narrative itself is so gratifying and comes together in such a holistic way that I don't think it really brings down the film at all. This is such an emotionally engaging and devastating and heartwarming experience that you can't even comprehend how many things this film touches on, from a social standpoint, from a historical standpoint, from a character standpoint, from an action standpoint. You guys have to see this movie. It is literally one of the greatest action movies ever made, and to a further extent, one of the greatest films in the history of cinema. So yeah, guys, that is my review for Godzilla Minus One. I mean, I don't know how you can't check it out after that, unless you don't like what I'm saying or agree with me at all on movies in general. But really, please take me at my word for this one, because I did not know how this movie was going to be. and this is like far and away the best movie I've seen in a long time. And it's kind of crazy because this year isn't even done, to be honest, and I can't wait because this really has been the best year for film since 2019. When we got masterpieces like Parasite and The Lighthouse, you know, like, I haven't seen anything like that since. And this has really been shaping up to be such a surprising and rewarding year for film. And yet again, I mean, there's some more movies that have come out this past weekend I still haven't gotten a chance to talk about, all of which are great. So I'm very excited to get into that. But I suppose the next review coming up, since this was the second most requested and voted on review at the time of recording this, my next review is going to be for Dream Scenario starring Nicolas Cage, so please be on the lookout for that. Should be out in the next day or so. Very excited to talk about that one as well. But yeah, guys, until then, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk soon.